Hello, and welcome to a live chapter reading of Stormwood by Luna Mayfield, as presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. The knock on the door surprised Lucy. No one knocked. They usually rang the bell or just walked in. Rarely did she have unexpected visitors, nor did she like them. Having an ex who couldn't take no for an answer left her a shell of her former self for many years. It wasn't until she admitted the truth to her therapist that she truly began to heal. The knocking grew impatient, forcing her to get up from the couch. I'm coming, Jesus. Opening the door, Lucy was greeted by a man she thought she recognized but couldn't quite place. Can I help you? She asked, keeping her hand on the door in case she needed to shut it quickly. Something about the guy made her nervous. Miss Delacroix, my name is Ambrose Frost, and I'm your great-aunt Millicent's attorney, he said, extending his hand. Lucy searched her mind, trying to recall where she heard this name before. She came up dry, but couldn't shake the feeling she knew him. When he didn't lower his hand, she reached out and shook it. Something felt off about this, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. 2 years ago, life had been difficult for Lucy. Her anxiety had peaked to a level she'd never experienced before. Most days, it took everything to get out of bed. She worked hard to bring herself out of the darkness. Even Beckett, her fiancé of 5 years, had struggled to understand her ever-changing moods. 1 minute, she was the smiling beauty he'd fallen in love with. The next, many times without warning, she became a sullen, withdrawn hole of sorrow. Her body had threatened to shut down. Pain became an everyday occurrence. Putting her hand on the doorframe, she inhaled a slow breath. Please, won't you come in? She stepped aside with a wave of her hand. Lucy hadn't noticed the wooden box that lay at his feet until he bent to pick it up. She furrowed her brow. Whatever lay inside tempted her to find out more about why he'd come. Can I get you anything? Coffee, perhaps? Ambrose nodded. That would be splendid. In the kitchen, she set about filling the pot with coffee and water. As she wiped down the counter, Ambrose sat at the breakfast bar and put the box beside him. I am terribly sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but your great-aunt recently passed away. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, one I will be happy to answer. But first, I have been instructed to give you this. Lucy furrowed her brow with a shake of her head. I don't understand. He nodded as he chuckled. I'm sure you're confused, Miss Delacroix. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Once you peruse the box's contents, we can meet at my office where I will provide everything necessary to alleviate your confusion. Setting the steaming cup in front of him, Lucy leaned against the counter. What? Please forgive me, but I don't see what this box has to do with anything. He smiled with a nod. Of course. There is a letter addressed to you, which I am sure explains further. Millicent was a stubborn woman. Lucy sighed as she sipped her coffee. He was right. Aunt Millie could be as stubborn as an ox when she set her mind to something. I will call tomorrow to give you a chance to collect yourself. I hope to ease some of your concerns then, he said as he stood and went to the door. Without another word, he descended the steps that led to the sidewalk. Lucy stared at his untouched cup of coffee. What the hell was all that? She sighed and looked out the window. It was then she noticed his car. Fancy didn't even begin to describe it. A sleek black limo, complete with driver, waited. He glanced up at her and with a wave of his hand climbed inside. A slight breeze from the open window caressed her face. Unease slithered down her spine. Something wasn't right. But first things first, she decided. She needed to call Beckett. Whatever lay hidden in the box would have to wait. There was no way she was going to open it until he was there with her. Chapter 2. Tell me again, what did he say exactly? Lucy shot Beckett a look. They'd already gone over what happened twice. She opened her mouth to repeat herself a third time when he lifted the cover of the box. The cover, lined with a deep red velvet, held little of interest other than an intricate carving of a house laid over lilies. But the contents of the box made Lucy pause. A leather-bound book lay on top of several papers. She reached for it without hesitation. Then there's an envelope with your name on it, Beckett said, handing it to her, revealing her full name scrawled on top. Lucille. Lucy's cheeks heated, and she shook her head. I hate Lucille. It was my grandmother's name, and I swear it was Mom's sick joke. Afraid, yet intrigued, she ripped the envelope to reveal a single-page handwritten letter. Flipping it over, she studied the tiny, delicate handwriting. What does it say? Beckett asked, startling her. Taking a deep breath, Lucy swallowed and began to read aloud. Dearest Lucille, if you are reading this, then I have moved on to the afterlife. I will not go into the sordid details of the days leading up to my passing, except to caution you not to make the same mistakes I did. It would have made things so much less lonely and painful had I reached out to someone. Instead, in my stubbornness, I opted to die alone. I suppose you are wondering why I have sent you this box, among other things. You see, the one thing I meticulously undertook in my life was the great care I bestowed upon our family's estate, Stormwood. The manor itself is as grand as it had always been. The lush grounds, however, are another story. You will see for yourself when you arrive. In this box, there are the keys to the estate, a map of the grounds, numerous blueprints and instructions on how to start the generators, and my journal. The journal details my life in Stormwood. Perhaps you will figure out the family secret I spent my entire life pondering. When you meet with my attorney, Ambrose Frost, you will become Stormwood's newest lady. I do hope, once you sign the papers, you do not decide to sell. The estate has been in our family for almost 200 years. Generations of the Delacroix family lived, grew, raised families, and died there. It is a place of grand splendor. It will not disappoint. Alas, dear niece, I must close this letter and prepare the box for Mr. Frost. Do not fear, my child. I will always cherish the time we spent together those many moons ago. All my love, Aunt Millie. For a moment, Lucy didn't know what to say. The last time she'd spent any time with her aunt at Stormwood was more than 15 years ago. From what little she remembered, she could see the lush gardens and immaculate home. The house was big, but that never bothered Aunt Millie. She said it allowed for plenty of overnight visitors. Rereading the letter, she shook her head. This is unbelievable, she muttered with a long, slow exhale. Beckett took the paper from Lucy's hand and set it aside. I can't even... He sighed and handed the journal to her. I'm so sorry for your loss, babe. Your aunt sounds like an interesting woman. She was, though I'd say eccentric before interesting. Lucy pondered what she would find written in the journal. The thought of reading Aunt Millie's deepest personal thoughts made her feel uncomfortable. The letter mentioned a family secret. Didn't most families have secrets or skeletons buried in their closets? What was so important about this one? Did Aunt Millie not figure it out? That thought seemed ludicrous. Too many questions filled her mind without any answers. The only thing the cover held was the letter D, carefully scripted to swirl through the leather. Lucy traced her finger over it, a small smile creeping to her face. She'd seen this D on a few other things at the manor, but it had been too long for her to recall exactly where. Wherever they were, she'd find them once she arrived at Stormwood. Getting up, she started toward the bedroom. I'm going to read, Lucy said to Beckett, continuing on her way upstairs. It wasn't late, but she wanted to get to the bottom of this mystery as quickly as possible, to prepare for the visit with Ambrose Frost. Something pulled her to open the pages when she sat on the edge of the bed. Within seconds, she was propped on her pillows examining the first entry. June 23rd, 1955. Dear Diary, the sun is shining today. I don't know why that seemed important to mention, but I feel as though I'm hanging in limbo. The sun is merely a pawn in whatever game this house is playing with me. I have no choice but to play along. There are consequences for those who refuse. I'm not sure when it all started or when I noticed things weren't quite right with Stormwood. I hear his voice as though he were right beside me. It's pleasant enough, his voice. I fear something sinister afoot. I will figure it out. Of this, I am certain. The gardens have never looked more lovely, nor has my hair. I wish I knew what was happening. Calling for help isn't an option, not one I'm willing to risk anyway. I know harm will come to me if I do. Call me eccentric if you must, but you will never call me a fool. You still reading that? Beckett sounded surprised as he leaned against the doorframe of the room. Lucy lifted her eyes at the sound of Beckett's voice. Her bedside light shone dimly in the dark, though she had no recollection of turning it on. Glancing at the diary in her hands, she saw she was already halfway through her aunt's words. She sighed. I wish I knew what Aunt Millie was talking about. She keeps talking about a family secret and how the house is playing games with her. Beckett narrowed his eyes as she reached out to close the diary. Lucy struggled to shut off her thoughts when under stress. The most recent time it happened was 2 years ago, and even though she fought like hell to break free from her demons, he continued to worry when she allowed herself to get sucked in. He patted the bed next to him with a smile that told her he wanted more than just to go to sleep. Sounds like you need to take a break. Turn off the light and come to bed. Lucy couldn't help but laugh. She wanted to keep reading, but the look in Beckett's eyes pushed the sensation away until all that was left was an urgent desire. Setting the book on the table, she turned the light off and snuggled down under the covers. Beckett murmured into her neck, pulling her to him. Desire shivered down her body and settled between her legs. She moaned. He trailed his lips across her jaw in search of her lips. God, you're wet. His fingers plied her thighs open. Take your shorts off. She didn't waste any time undressing. Shivering with need, she grinned and climbed over him, glad to find him already naked. She couldn't imagine the struggle to tear his boxers off. Her breathing heavy, Lucy guided him inside her and let her head fall back. He gripped her hips as she moved. Chapter 3. Toll, as he was known in this form, extended his hand to her, a smile pulling at his lips. The lady of the manor was his now. He would care for her, and she for him. Her eyes lit up when she took his hand, that deep sparkling blue he'd grown to love in those 2 short days she'd been at the manor. He'd never experienced feelings like this. The love and adoration he felt making his heart pound hard in his chest. None of the former caretakers had ever elicited such sensations in him, and he found he didn't want it any other way. Standing at the open window, overlooking the crashing sea, her deep mahogany-colored hair blowing in the breeze, Lucy smiled. She was where she was supposed to be. Toll trailed a hand down her back, light as a feather. She shivered against his touch. Come, darling, he said, his voice plying its sultry fingers between her thighs. I have so much I wish to show you. A whispering moan came from Lucy's lips, startling the other 2 people in the room with her. She hadn't meant to doze off, though one could hardly call what had happened sleep. It was as though she'd been transported to another time and place, the feelings and sensations still as strong as if she were there. Babe, are you okay? Lucy looked from Beckett to Ambrose Frost, sitting across from them, and back again. Confusion registered on her face. What? And that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the chapter reading of Stormwood by Luna Mayfield, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Good night!